All right, welcome back. In this, we're going to go with the bicarbonate buffer system. I made a lifetime total of $24.91. If you're wondering why my audio sounds a little weird today, it's because, well, two reasons. One, I'm on vacation, and number two, I have COVID. So, yeah, but life continues. All right, the bicarbonate buffer system. This system is so important. In fact, in matter of fact, if you are a doctor or becoming a doctor, a nurse, a physicist, a chemist, going to business, or even media, this is something you should really know because this is why you are alive. I had a neighbor, and when I was in college, and I went over one day, and I asked her, okay, what is your major? And she's like, oh, I'm a media major. I was like, so what are you gonna do with your life? Just make TikTok videos? And she was like, I'll be honest with you, I don't know why I'm even here. Like, I'm paying $45,000 for a degree in media, and I don't even know what I'm gonna do. And she's like, I could do this at community college, to be honest. I was like, so you're just wasting money? I was like, maybe you should learn the bicarbonate buffer system and get a degree in STEM. But, okay, the bicarbonate buffer system. This is a mechanism built into your body to control the pH of your blood and duodenum, which is in the small intestines. But we're only going to be focusing on the blood right here. So here is the famous equation. We're going to go into this way more in depth, but this is just the overall view. What's happening is CO2 is going to combine with water. And this is going to create carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is then going to go into form bicarbonate and a proton. And it's completely reversible. So let's get into it. Organs, which are made up of cells, use oxygen. No way, right? Like, oh my god, what a breakthrough. So they use oxygen for energy and other processes. Now, when oxygen is used up, the byproduct is CO2. Now, here's the kicker. CO2 cannot stay inside the cells. The reason is because CO2 is acidic. If it were to stay, the cells would turn acidic and acidosis would occur. Now, acidosis is really bad. If your cells get too acidic, the enzymes and proteins could denature, killing the cell. Because remember, cells, there's so many enzymes floating around everywhere. There's proteins, floating around everywhere. It's 100% necessary, right, for the cell to live. And if the cell were to get too acidic, it would die. So that's why it's really bad. So here is the little gist of what's happening here. So, right, you breathe in oxygen. It gets transported via red blood cells into the cell. Goes in the cell, the mitochondria does its thing, right, to get energy. And the byproduct is CO2. Now, CO2 will go into the blood vessels to go back into go to the heart and to the lungs, right, to be exhaled. But how does it get to the blood vessels? Diffusion. Remember, in diffusion, we go from areas of high concentration to low concentration. And the cell does a high concentration of CO2 because we are converting oxygen to make energy and the byproduct is CO2. So there's a high amount of CO2 in the cells, right? There's a low amount of CO2 in the blood vessels. So it's going to willingly diffuse into the blood vessels. So that's how we're getting there. Okay. Here is a diagram that I made. This right here, the text, is what the diagram explains. If you like to read instead, it's the same thing. But I'm going to explain it by the diagram because I think it's easier. Okay, when CO2 gets shoved into the blood, a few things will happen. What you need to know is this red ring here is blood plasma. So anything inside here is blood plasma, and inside that is red blood cells. So what will happen is when CO2 enters the blood, some of it will go in the blood plasma here, in the surrounding area here. Not too much, but a little bit, and it will be dissolved. So the CO2 will be dissolved in the blood plasma. But that's not really important. What's really important is the red blood cell stuff. So CO2 will enter the red blood cell. Some of it will. Two different things will happen. Well, two different pathways will occur at the same time. About 20% to 30% will bind to hemoglobin. Now, it's a very common misconception that hemoglobin is only for oxygen. It is not. It is also for CO2. However, hemoglobin likes the oxygen more. It has a higher affinity for oxygen, so oxygen will bind more tightly. But CO2 will also bind, but not as tightly. So some of the CO2 will bind to hemoglobin. The other portion will combine with water. Water is already in the red blood cell. An enzyme is going to come along called carbonic anhydrase. So all of these three things are going to come together to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is just an intermediate step. It doesn't do anything. It's like the halfway point. But what really happens is right after, like I'm talking milliseconds, after carbonic acid is formed, bicarbonate and protons are formed, which is this. Now notice, if you were to combine one proton and bicarbonate, you get carbonic acid, right? We have one H here, we have another H here, that's two H's, and CO3. So we're just breaking up this, right? We're breaking up the hydrogen here. So we're getting bicarbonate and a proton. Let's go over what will happen to the proton. Remember, protons are acidic. So we need a way to kidnap this. So what's going to happen is hemoglobin is going to come along and kidnap the proton. And it's going to keep it safe. So it's going to fully reduce hemoglobin to HHB. Now, let's go over this, let's back up. Why are we doing this? Let's think about this. So CO2, like I said, is acidic, but we cannot do anything with CO2. We can only 20 to 30% can bind to hemoglobin, stabilize it. But what about the 70%, the 70 to 80% of CO2? We have nothing to kidnap it. We need to take it away somewhere, do something with it. Otherwise, our blood will get acidic. And the only thing we can do is break it up into something else which can be kidnapped. We can kidnap protons. So the whole goal here is to break down CO2, change it into something else that can be kidnapped so our blood does not get acidic. This is the whole point of the bicarbonate buffer system. So the proton is going to be kidnapped by hemoglobin. And when it's kidnapped by hemoglobin, it does not participate in the acidity. Like it's no longer acidic. Now the bicarbonate is going to go into the blood plasma. We're going to get rid of it out of the red blood cell so the red blood cell does not die. What's going to happen is to get this out of the red blood cell and into the plasma, the blood plasma, we need to exchange chloride anion. So this chloride ion here is going to go inside the red blood cell in exchange for bicarbonate, which is going to go into the plasma. And the protein that does this is called AE4. AE1. What am I saying? AE1. Okay. So far, so good, right? So what I basically said right here, all of this is what I just explained. Okay. Now, most of the CO2 is now in the blood plasma in the form of bicarbonate, right? Because this was the CO2, we transform it into bicarbonate, and now it's in the blood plasma. So now it can go into the blood plasma. We are now going to transport this to the lungs, right? It has to go to the heart first, and then it's going to go to the lungs. This is a very bad sketch of the lungs, one side of the lungs, but this is the bronchioles, right? And then we got the alveoli. So we're breathing in oxygen. What's going to happen is these alveoli, or sacs, air sacs, essentially, in the lungs, hold oxygen. There are blood vessels around the alveoli. So remember, we took this red blood cell, we did all this stuff, right? So the CO2 is going to diffuse into the alveoli, right? So what's going to happen is bicarbonate is going to use AE1 and go back into the red blood cell. And we're going to exchange chloride, and this is going to go back in the blood plasma. So we're doing exactly the opposite. Everything we did here, we're doing the opposite. Because we need to get back to CO2, right? We're in bicarbonate form, right? We're in bicarbonate form right here. So we're going to combine bicarbonate and the proton. So what's going to happen is the hemoglobin is going to let go of the proton. These two are going to form to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is going to break apart into CO2 and water. CO2 will diffuse into the alveoli, and then we'll exhale this out. The oxygen is going to enter the red blood cell. There's something called the Haldane effect. Basically, hemoglobin likes oxygen more. So what's going to happen is when oxygen is in the alveoli, hemoglobin senses it. Hemoglobin is like, oh my God, my best buddy's here, right? He's come to visit me. I'm going to let go of the CO2 and accept oxygen because it likes oxygen more, like I said earlier. So that's the reason CO2 leaves. It's because hemoglobin is letting go of it. So CO2 is willingly able to go and diffuse into the alveoli to be exhaled, and oxygen will take its place. And that's all that's happening. That's it. That is the bicarbonate buffer system. Okay, now let's actually talk about equilibrium and Le Chatelier's principle and all that kind of stuff. Okay, if the blood gets too acidic, as in the pH gets lower, aka acidosis, the excess protons, because remember, we're acidic, so we have a lower pH. If you have a lower pH, we have more protons floating around. So we have more of this. So you have more protons. What will happen, it's going to form more of the protons, and more of the bicarbonate is going to form together to form carbonic acid. More carbonic acid is going to form, meaning we're going to form more CO2. This is why when your blood gets acidic, you will exhale faster. And I can prove this to you. You can hold your breath and hold it as long as you can. Like, don't pass out, but like hold your breath. And you'll notice when you exhale, like when you cannot hold your breath anymore and you exhale, you will breathe a little bit faster for a few seconds. This is why. It's because your blood is getting too acidic and you need to exhale faster to get rid of the CO2 because your blood is getting acidic. That's the whole point. So remember, if you have a lower pH, that means your blood is acidic. We have more of this by default because I'm telling you that our blood is acidic. So we have more of this. More of this will form together to form carbonic acid, and we're going to have more CO2. If your blood gets too basic, this is called alkalosis, or your pH gets higher. This reaction will be shifted to the right, meaning more carbonic acid is going to form to be converted to bicarbonate to acidify the blood, and more protons to acidify the blood. So you get slower breathing. Because remember, if we have a higher pH, which is bad, it's equally as bad as having a low pH. So if you have a high pH, we need more protons in the blood to lower the pH. So we're going to form more carbonic acid, more bicarbonate, and more protons to help lower the pH of the blood. Now let's go back here. A lot of students question, what's the point of hemoglobin? Why do we have the second pathway? And it's for flexibility, one, and number two, it helps move the reaction forward. So think about this. If you had a genetic mutation that caused this system to break apart and not function at all, at least you have a backup system here. I mean, you probably would die, but at least you have this backup system to sequester some of the CO2. Even though it's only 20 to 30%, at least it's something, right? Your body likes flexibility. If something goes wrong, you need a backup system. That's the point, right? Is we need somewhere to shove the CO2 just in case if you get too acidic. That's the point. And hemoglobin will do that, but it can only handle 20 to 30% of the CO2. That's the reason. And the other reason is to push the reaction forward. If CO2 is no longer there, right, it's bounded to hemoglobin or it's in bicarbonate and proton form, more CO2 can enter the red blood cell. Right? We need to do this as fast as possible, right? We need to get things moving, right? If our cells are using so much oxygen and in turn making more energy, we're gonna have more CO2. Your red blood cells can only hold so much CO2, but we need to move the reaction forward. And how we're going to do that? Well, if we basically bond some of it to hemoglobin and convert it to carbonic acid and bicarbonate, we can let more CO2 in because of diffusion. That's the reason why. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. Until next time, later.